Hey there guys, so just going over today a few of the exercises for natural stone lifting in terms of like accessory work and what's going to work the best. Um, you have a look at what typically breaks down. A lot of people struggle breaking the stone off the ground. So that would be a pretty simple exercise in itself. It's almost like a partial row. Set yourself up correctly, brace, and the goal is literally just to break it off the floor, by a few inches, and getting used to the movement. What you also want to do when you're, mucking around, breaking it off the ground, find out your different handholds for the stone, because there's going to be some that work really well and there's going to be others that are quite poor. Some of the really poor ones are going to be excellent for like grip work in general, but when it comes to successfully lifting the stone, you want to go with the handholds that are the strongest and feeling the best in your hands, because that's going to give you more confidence. You're going to lap the stone a lot faster and you're going to save a lot more energy. Another very similar variation as well, depending upon where you get stuck, you might put a few planks of wood stacked on top of each other, then rest the stone on top of that, and then get your hands, put your hands on the same handholds, but you're lifting it from an elevated position, so you can work at different sticking points, throughout your lift and wherever you basically get stuck. For me, I normally find that lapping it isn't an issue. My sticking point is then once I've lapped it, trying to get into the, try to squat it up essentially. So mine comes down to a lot more, rotating the stone to position and then squatting up. The rotating isn't too bad. It saps a fair bit of energy, but nothing quite as, intensive as, squatting the stone up. So for me, another assistant exercise is to pick a moderate, slightly heavier stone and just, practice doing some rep work. And then, when you're coming up to squat up, almost sit in that sticking point position. And you just want to hold it there for 3-4 seconds or a 3-4 count, and then go back down into the squat position. So you're just doing partial reps. For me, I'm going to do that today just with a lighter stone, because that's working my specific sticking point. Generally, wherever you have your sticking point, if you're working just a fraction below that as well, that's generally where you lose momentum. You lose your momentum, you lose your speed, you get stuck. So for me, I almost get to the position where I can, stand up with it. So I'm just going to bring it down a fraction, hold that for a paused, squat with a stone, sort of lapped, because that's going to work really well. Then after that, other people, it's just forearms and, grip in general. Look, a very simple one, if you don't have a lot of equipment, you can either get a sledgehammer or an axe, and you just, extending it forward and back with your wrists, sort of like, you're hitting a hammer, that sort of motion, but with your arm extended. Now, a lot of people are not going to be able to grab the sledgehammer by the very end and, extend their wrist all the way forward and then pull it back. It's just too hard to do. So, flexion and extension in that essence is really difficult. So just work your way down the hammer. You might want to put a few, marks, every 10 centimeters, put a mark. And you've got different difficulty levels, like 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. That way you've got a gauge. Reps, I'd probably aim more for the 15 to 20 rep range, and you want to work both hands quite evenly. A lot of the time when you go to lift something really heavy, it's always going to be your grip that's going to give out, because in essence, your grip should be a safety mechanism for your back. Like, if something's too heavy to pick up with your hands, your back then doesn't have to deal with it. If you can break it off the floor, then hey, guess what? Back has to be involved to finish off the lift. So be mindful with that as well. The other one is, as I said, back. Yesterday I did, say, for instance, my stiff-legged deadlifts. I just go higher up, 3 sets of 20. I don't like going heavy with stiff-leggeds. I'm after a quality movement and pumping blood in and gaining a little bit of strength through doing them. It's also a great prehab tool, and work on like bracing while you're doing that as well. And you can learn how your lower back feels under load while keeping it, dead straight. That's going to help, with the natural stone lifting, because the reality is the weight that you're lifting with a stone is always going to be far less than what you can put on a barbell. You've got to remember, with a stone, your center of gravity is shifted forward, so you're in quite an awkward position. But if you're bracing, doing some of those, partial rows off the ground with the stone, doing some quality stiff-legged deadlifts for blood flow and just keeping your lower back happy. That's going to go a really long way. Then after that, you just have your general planks, hold your plank for 2 minutes and do your side planks, either side, left, right, for a minute. I find that works quite well. And then finish off with some like ab crunches. My goal is just to work towards 60 ab crunches in one set. I'm pretty close. When I've been training them for a few weeks, I can get 60 no problem. If I've taken a break for a while, then I'm back in struggle town. But I quickly get back to the 60. You want to have that functional ab strength just to help with the bracing, and I find a crunch works better than say the leg raises, because when you do leg raises, a lot of times your hip flexors will take over quite heavily, and it doesn't really hit your lower abs as well. And same goes for the sit-ups. If you have someone putting their weight on your feet to help you sit up or stabilize you, you're going to use a lot more hip flexors. You just want to go for a short crunch. For me, I just lay on my back and I make 2 fists and just make my knuckles touch the top of my knees and down. So it's not a very long range of motion, but it's effective and you do feel it the next day. If you have like one of those resistant bands, another option, with the stone squats, stand on the resistant band, get in position with the stone, loop the band on top of the stone, and then stand up with it. And now you've got, band loaded stones to an extent. Means base position, where you're not struggling, is quite easy, but then you can work on your sticking points through the higher portion of the lift after you've really lapped it and come up. That's where the resistance is going to increase. For me, I'm going to play around with that today. I'm just going to use a stone that probably weighs 76 kilos and add some band tension to it and go for 10 reps. Mind you, I did do front squats last night with a stiff-legged deadlift, so I'm not going ridiculously heavy today. Today for me is the assistant exercises, so I can successfully beat that heavy stone. After that, you want to look at your upper back in general. So for me, that's just pull-ups. Yeah, your forearms get taxed as well. I'd save the the sledgehammer or axe exercises for the your wrists and forearms until after the pull-ups, because you don't want your pull-ups to go down the drain because you taxed your forearms. A strong upper back is going to help lats, upper back, everything, just to hold and wrestle that stone into position. And when you're gripping a stone, after you've lapped it and you're standing up, your upper back has to work really hard isometrically, and so do your biceps as well. You're not curling the stone up. Like, do not try and do that, because if you put yourself in a position where you're trying to curl the stone up, that's where injuries to biceps can happen. And same with like atlas stones. If people try and curl the stone to position, that's generally where a bicep tear will happen. And if you look really closely at people that have torn biceps, or you look through how they've lifted, you'll also notice that they will try and put their hands too low on the stone or the atlas stone, and they're curling it up into their body. And it's that heavy loading of the arms and that curl motion that causes, a lot of problems. Versus if you have your hands, wrapped around the middle of the stone and you're pulling it into you, it's not so much bicep as it is, your upper back and lats pulling the stone into your chest. And the higher you sit it on your upper chest, that's going to make breathing really hard. But if you do sit it higher on your chest, you're able to offset some of the weight with your body, and then it's almost like you're pulling slightly down. You don't have to use as much arms. The highest stone position, it's going to come down to mobility. For me, I'm not one that can do that very well. For me, I aim more for that mid chest region and pull the stone in, because it's a lot easier on the arms. If you find yourself wrestling, with a stone, and in previous videos I've had my arm all the way outreach to try and grab the stone, I'm not trying to curl the stone in. I grab it and I try and pull back with my scapula and lat. That saves my biceps as much as possible. And then after you've finished absolutely everything, just muck around with a few of the barbell curls, just an empty barbell, go for 20 reps. Pump some blood into the arms. You'll also notice, with a straight bar, it's going to force your wrists and hands to be completely supinated, which is going to, add to mobility and longevity in your arms and biceps in general. And 20 reps, you're pumping some significant amount of blood in, but people that struggle with supination, like the actual act of supinating, when you do it, you'll find your bicep switches on. So, you know, pronate, supinate. So that motion, you know, you can see bicep switches on. For a lot of people, just trying to get their hands in that supinated position is quite taxing, and you'll find, you know, they'll struggle with a straight barbell for a while until they get that mobility, because that isometric contraction, you know, of the bicep just to hold you in position is quite taxing, and then you're curling the weight up as well. So, you know, they're just a few of my, you know, tips and just general advice. I'd also treat, you know, your really, really heavy stone sessions with the same respect as like a really heavy deadlift day. You know, it may not be as taxing on the lower back, but there's a lot of smaller things that's going to be really quite taxing on, especially, you know, your biceps and things like that. And you don't want to go maxing out with a heavy stone twice a week, especially if you're not conditioned, because, you know, your risk of injury is just skyrocketing. So you want to be really mindful of that. But yeah, you know, I'll have the one heavy session and I'm having the one lighter session. And a lot of the time, you know, your lighter session is where you're going to be really quite productive. The heavy session is just great to conquer the stone, you know, find out how strong you are in general. But yeah, just treat it with the same respect as like heavy deads. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to comment below. Otherwise, have a great day wherever you are.